Hi, everybody. It's Justin. I am the communications guy here at St. James in the City. And tonight we have a very special guest on Conversations with Kate. And this is the Reverend Kate Cress. Hi, Kate.
Hi, Justin. Hi, everyone.
Hi. So a lot of you may have, there's already plenty of people in the chat that I'm seeing that are on board. And a couple of you have already probably remember me from our conversation we just had a couple weeks ago.
I know. That was so much fun.
So afterwards, I kind of called Kate and I said, hey, what do you think about being a guest on your own show? And so she said, do people really want to know about me? And I said, of course. So I just hit the camera. So I just thought we'd take a few minutes and just talk about who Kate is and kind of just bring us to some stories and kind of tell us about your life and family and what brought you to St. James. So,
all right. So can I just say to everyone, I'm nervous and I'm never nervous, but this makes me nervous.
Well, you know,
I think I like being in the interviewer better than the one interview.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, you remember the first couple of interactions you and I had about being on camera.
Yes.
Doing things, you were very nervous too.
I was so nervous that I just wanted to crawl in a hole. But then I started liking it.
Which is so crazy to me because do you want to tell everybody our first story about how you learned to love Twitter?
Well, I think we talked about it on our call. I mean, the night before I was going to Korea, I said, Justin, you have to teach me how to do Twitter because I wanted to tell the story of traveling around. Yeah. Going back to Korea after 35 years. And I'm sorry, I have two dogs. They're going to bark. So you just showed it to me, and then I started.
And now you're a tweet fiend. You have
I love it.
So many tweets.
But what I love about it is I love that it's sort of like haiku, which I also love. I just love how the purity of how you can try to say one thing in a very clear, pure way and create a moment. That's what I love.
Yeah, and you're doing that on Twitter to help connect people that are listening to what you have to say, but it's also an exercise for yourself, I think. Mm-hmm. And then that brings us to what we're doing right now with this interview. Do you want to talk about how this, and we can both talk about how this whole kind of series came to be?
I don't remember how it got started. I'm sure I didn't say, can I have a Friday night show? I'm sure it wasn't my idea.
I think, and we have a communications team here, and we often talk about strategies to reach the world and our congregation. And I think it was Bob Williams that wanted to try to do something like a rector's forum or something where the parish could come and talk to their rector. And right?
Oh yeah, I remember that. Was it the first night that the first time I think I was just talking to the people in the chat about the pandemic, and the next time we did takeout together, takeout with Kate.
Right.
But that was frustrating because I was busy talking and I didn't get to eat. So I didn't love that model.
We won't do that again.
Then we started.
Yeah.
Then we started inviting guests, and that's been what I love about that is my number one dream for St. James in the City is that everybody here can get to know each other better. As individuals and across cultures and across traditions and across languages. And, that is St. James. And I think that the more and more that we learn to do that on a deeper and deeper level, that's our number one charism, I think.
Yeah. And one of the things that has helped you center all of us here, I think I told you one time that I feel personally as a parishioner here, that part of what you helped to do was to teach us how to love ourselves again.
You're very lovable. It's the easiest. Yeah. Loving you all is the easiest job in the world.
But it also helped, I think right now what we're doing, even this event that we're doing, is helping us to get to know each other and helping us to love one another too.
That's right. And I think that's so important. And I do think there's a difference between loving the idea of somebody and really getting to know that person, really getting inside the beliefs and the traditions and the values that make that person tick, like that level of knowing.
Yeah, and it's sort of being put to the test right now.
It is. And yet I also think this is a huge opportunity because this is not a criticism of St. James because I adore our church. Sometimes I think people look around and see all of the diversity and they just say to themselves, everybody from every different tradition, oh, it's great to be in this place where there's so much diversity, as if that's the end. And that's just the beginning. So now when we can't even do that, we have to work harder, I think, to really look beyond the surface, the beautiful surfaces of people and get to know them.
Yeah, I've been doing that in my own life for sure. And on a larger scale, everybody knows that I work in social media. That's even a more magnified challenge and I've been really, really thinking about what makes online relationships in one format so amazing and so wonderful, and on the other side so disconnected and so rife with discomfort and destruction. And I think it's because I've been doing a lot of thinking about it's because we're getting these bits and pieces of stories without any context all the time. And so we're not getting to know each other. We're not getting the full conversation. So instead of conversations, we're getting little highlights without the backstory. And I've also been doing a lot of I just got the new HBO Max platform. And they've put a lot of the older movies from like the 1950s era on there. So I've been doing a lot of my nightly thing I look forward to now is watching those old movies.
Fun. Like what? What do you mean?
I watched Rebel Without a Cause last night. I have never seen it.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
And then Giant, and there's a James Dean theme going on here. But and then Gone with the Wind, of course. But just kind of things that I've always wanted to see but hadn't. But what I've noticed is that the breadth of the storytelling is so much wider. You get so much more exposition in those stories than you do in blockbuster films these days.
Oh, yeah.
And so it just made me start thinking about, even in conversations that we do here, or and now in Zoom conversations that we're having possibly, or reading about other people, I think we've slowed down a little bit now so that we can kind of drink in more about who our neighbor is, what the story really is. And so in that theme, can we go back a little bit to know a little bit more about who Kate is? And so can you just tell me a little bit about who Kate was as a girl growing up? Tell us where you were born and what was that like?
So, I was born on an Air Force base in Ohio. And then we moved to an Air Force base in Nebraska, and that's where my brother was born. Then we moved to Kentucky. I was about 3 then, and that's where my parents were from. My dad just was in the Air Force, so we traveled around. Okay. And we just spent the sort of first, until I was 9, I lived in Kentucky, and it was good because my grandmother and grandfather were in town, and the other set of grandparents were up in the mountains of Kentucky. We'd go there on weekends, and there were lots of relatives. But even though I loved Kentucky and I loved being at my grandmother's house, my parents' marriage broke up, and that was not great. So when I was 9 or 10, my mom remarried her high school sweetheart, who was from the rich side of the tracks, and she was from the poorer side of the tracks. My grandfather worked in a gas station, but I think she'd always loved this rich guy from across town. So she married him, and then we moved overseas, and I lived in Malaysia for 3rd grade and 4th grade, and then we moved to the Boston area for a while he got his PhD at Harvard, and then we moved to Botswana during my high school years in Southern Africa. And then we moved to Washington, D.C. And so for my life growing up, it was a lot of excitement moving and living in all these different cultures and all of a sudden living this privileged life when we've been living, more of a hand-me-down clothes life. And then suddenly we had servants and drivers and that whole expat life. In those days, he worked for the Ford Foundation. And so it was very exciting. I loved living in all those places, but also very heartbreaking to be a world away from my dad always. And, as people do, he remarried and had 4 stepchildren. And so it was never the same during the summers when we visit. We'd be crammed into their family. And so it was hard. It was a loss. I think a lot of times when parents divorce, it's so hard on the kids because they end up sort of choosing or having a choice made for them to be with one parent or the other more. And so it's lost. So something was lost, but other things were gained. I mean, becoming a world traveler was a huge gift to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So I didn't realize that you were in a military family.
With my father, yes.
Yeah. So
that was just for traveling in the U.S.
Sure.
And then,
can you talk about, because I have no idea what that's about. Obviously, I have friends that were, but how did that speak to your life as being so transitory all the time?
Well, when with my dad in the Air Force, I don't think it really fazed me because I was just a toddler, a baby and a toddler.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't that long.
Yeah, that wasn't that long. By the time I was 3, we were living in Kentucky and we were very, very rooted.
Okay.
But with my stepfather's jobs, it was like being an Army brat, sort of. I was one of those kids who was always starting over, moving to a new place, making a whole new group of friends, getting, settled 2 years, 3 years, and then it was time to pack up, say goodbye to everybody and move to the next. And there are, there's lots of people like me who grew up that way. And it's not easy, but I'm kind of grateful for there's a lot of skills that come from having to do that, right?
Right. Yeah. You mentioned some of them here, but you've been to Kenya, Uganda, Israel, India, Europe, and now Ireland.
That's right.
Spain, right?
Spain, that's right. That's all last year.
Yeah.
No, last year was so crazy. In January, I went to Kenya to see my mom. And then in the spring, we went to Korea on a trip with Father Ko. And then Ireland in the summer, Spain and Ireland in the summer. Amazing.
Yeah. So that must have been, I remember, do you consider yourself to be a Southerner?
I do. And the reason I do is that no matter where I've lived in my life, as a child, we always went back to Kentucky for home leave in the summer for a month or 2. And so that was the only constant. So I completely identify as a Southerner.
Yeah. As you know, growing up in South Carolina was being a Southerner too. I feel there's a lot of people, and you can agree with me or not, most people in the South don't leave. That's where you grew up. That's where you stay. What does your father do? You have to build this family tree and you're staying there to do this thing. But I always had this urge to kind of get out and explore the world. And I was really lucky. I think my first trip was to England in like the 90s or something. But it completely changes you once you make a trip like that. And you want more and more and more. So I think I see what you're saying about sort of being fortunate to have, even though you missed your dad and even though you had all these life changes, there are other things kind of there for you. The universe was kind of making the world your kind of playground, right? Yes.
And I think it also, it made, my brother and I are close in age, just 18 months. And it made, we always, when we moved to a new place, we depend on each other for the first, however long it took to work to get our new friends figured out. So I think we really depended on each other. And another nice thing that happened was that, the stepfather, who turned out to be a monstrous human being, but he had great children from a previous marriage. And they also lived with us and traveled with us some of the time. So I had another sister, my stepsister Terry, and my stepbrother Lauren, who were part of this mix too. And, we all had our ups and downs and good years and bad years, but I feel as close to them as my biological brother and sister. So I also picked up some more siblings along the way.
Yeah, so that's a lot. So you had a big family, really.
Yeah.
Is that still something that you have connections with in this big family?
Very much so. Very much so.
I've heard you talk about your sister, but you have a sister here.
Yeah, I have a sister who lives in a little town called Springville in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains. So you drive up to Bakersfield, and then somehow you go another hour, and you end up. It's a little rodeo town, very sweet, and what?
And likes to bake things.
And she's a very good baker. That's right. That's something that we both love.
Yeah.
And she is my best friend.
That's great.
Definitely. Yeah, we talk. I think we talk every day, and it's wonderful for me to be in the same state and the same time zone for the first time almost in our whole adult lives, and I saw her recently, and I'm going to see her again this week, so it's really special to me to be near her.
That's great. And there's something to be said about for people that don't come from large families or don't have that concept of family at all. What do you think having that experience, I mean, the sort of the opposite of what we just talked about with isolation and being separated and feeling like there's no home. But in the same way, you have all this big kind of family that you can go to. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about when now we talk about family so much at St. James and with each other and the world and all these communities that we're creating. And we really are creating these little kind of family pods with everything that we're doing here. I think that's interesting. And this is a good segue to talk about, you just got a new family member in your house.
I did. I love dogs so much, and I came here to California with two, but one of them died last year. He was 17, so it was a good long life. And so I just got a rescue dog from up near my sister's place from Visalia, actually, and he's I think he's sort of a Chihuahua German Shepherd mix. And he's very wild and adorable. So yeah,
should be.
My elderly dog and I are just adjusting to all this new energy.
Right. Well, I want to. I at the side of my eye, I see 1,000 questions coming here. So I just want to make sure that I'm addressing them and not missing them any. So if I'm turning my head, sorry. So Jerry Hurley's in the chat, and she's so
hi Jerry.
To this. Sarah Jane Thies, Stuart Falk is here. Greg Dern is here. A great way to spend the evening on the Northern Plains, he says.
Aw, that's so nice.
Honored to be.
We love those Derns, father and son.
Yeah. Comfort is here, of course.
Of course.
Comfort, your biggest fan. And then Chris Woodyard is here. Let's see. So let me see if I just have a question really quick. Okay. Yeah, we'll get there. We're gonna get there. Some of these questions I want to wait for just a second.
Okay. All right.
Okay. This is from Comfort. This is an interesting question. Mother Kay, you have this command of delivering authentic sermons. How much time does it take you to prepare for your sermons?
Wow, I'm grateful for that question. What I'm interested in a sermon is the simplicity on the other side of complexity. So I think my sermons may seem simple, but they take a long time, because what I do is I start early in the week studying the scripture and then reading the commentaries and then praying on that and then praying some more for inspiration. And, it takes, I would say that it takes easily 6 hours. I mean, I'm also baking brownies and stalling and getting stuck, and but I would say it takes the better part of a workday, because it's an experience of really connecting with the gospel and understanding it as best I can from a socio-historical perspective, but not that I talk about it that way too much. But I have to know that to understand what I think was meant at the time. And then I have to sort of listen to what I think the text is trying to say to us today, because it's alive in a way, and so that's just an unpredictable process, but it's thrilling. And and sometimes when I wake up in the morning, the first thing that happens is something just goes click, and I finally understand, what the story is in a way that I didn't before, and I love that feeling. And some weeks the sermons write themselves. It's like they can't wait to be written, and other weeks it's like, pushing a boulder up a hill. But it's always really one of my favorite things. I love to write and to think about, not just to write. I like to write for conversation, in a sense, I mean, I was an academic for many years, and I hate that kind of writing because it feels cold.
Yeah.
But I like writing that's about sort of an immediate communication with a community.
Can you talk about that a little? I mean, you have a lot of educational experience.
I do.
I mean, before you came to St. James, you had sort of maybe one or two other lives. And
you're one to talk. you had 9 easily.
Yeah. Well, in the sense of, okay, you went to school first for what? What was your first degree in?
Okay, so undergrad, I went to Georgetown and I studied English.
And so the connection here is you consider yourself to be a writer, I would think. I mean, you just said that you love to write, so you're a writer. So did that passion of writing, or not necessarily being a writer or something like, or an author, but that idea that you have something inside you to tell.
So I went to high school in Botswana, and I went to this little school in Gaborone called Maruapula, Rain Cloud, because they love rain in Botswana. And it was just 100 students, just high school, and all the students were from Botswana, Southern Africa, then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. I was one of only a couple of white students, and the standard of the school was very high. And there was an English teacher there. He was from a famous American prep school, Groton, I think. And he was this grumpy old man who smoked a pipe, didn't give me the time of day, but I loved English so much, and I tried so hard. And this one day, I remember we had to write an essay, anything we wanted to do about Shakespeare. And so I came up with this idea of writing an essay about bird imagery in Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth, and comparing the use of bird imagery. I mean, this just came to me like a giant light bulb, and I never had more fun in my life writing, handwriting it into little blue notebooks, and it was pages long. It was just this moment when I actually came into my own as somebody who saw writing as an exciting,
It's sort of do you feel like it's sort of investigative? It's trying to find the solution?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I love focusing on a small thing and finding it throughout a particular piece or a couple of pieces. And he went into class that day and he said, he's grumbling, "You don't have your essays back because it took the whole time to read one, but it was very good." And that was just the moment that I think I was born as a writer or an academic, at least in those days. And but you go to college to study English. You don't know why. I just did that because I loved English. I loved literature.
Yeah, the same thing when I went to school for music, because that's what I loved to do. And
it's just what you love.
Right. Then some other things came out of it. So you're writing, you're in English, you're figuring out all these things. And then you sort of made a kind of a shift to more of an investigator as a scientist.
Not quite. There was another stage in between. It was sort of graduation week at Georgetown, and I was walking across the green, and I ran into an acquaintance, not even a friend. And I asked her what she was doing next, and she said, "Oh, I'm going to Brown University. They have this free program for a June to June program, and you can get a master's degree and a teaching certificate." And I remember thinking, well, that's a great idea. That's literally why I did that. So I took a year off, and I waited tables in Georgetown. And then I went to Brown and got a teaching certificate. And then I needed a teaching job. And I was reading the Boston Globe one day with my friends when we were about to graduate. And there was an ad for a job in Korea. And I'd never been to Korea. I didn't even know exactly. I don't think I knew very much at all about it. But I love that feeling of jumping off into. And so they had job interviews at a local Holiday Inn. So it sounds sketchy, but it was legitimate. And it turns out it was a hyper Christian school, and I did evangelicals, and so I just found myself in a whole new world of unexpected learning. But I got to spend a couple of years in Korea and learn how to be a high school English teacher, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I taught high school too, and I remember having sort of a similar experience where it kind of just discovered me, and that I found I loved it so much.
Oh, I loved it. I loved teaching. It's incredibly hard.
Do you feel like do you feel like you still teach? Do you feel like you still have a teacher in you that's going through life?
Yes. The way that I taught back in those days, and when I taught college classes, is very much a facilitating style. To me, at other times when I've taught, the perfect classroom is when students are all over the room with whiteboards, and they're putting different ideas and pieces of information up, and I'm helping them find a through line and a sort of a deeper meaning, and we're creating meaning together. That's teaching for me, not talk and talk. So in that sense, I think I still, if we can call that teaching, then definitely that's what I still do. And in fact, when I first started preparing to be a priest, I remember thinking, how am I ever going to preach a sermon? That is so weird that I'm the only one talking. How's that going to work?
Well, that shows that's a sign of a good teacher, actually. But I think that's interesting, because that's what you do with us. And I think, to Comfort's point, that's why your sermons are so compelling, because we're sort of the students in the room that get to unpack this mystery with you into what the journey is going to be today, and what investigative report we found out is going to be. And there always is really exciting things that we can discover about our world or about ourselves in these sermons that you tell.
So I was also a researcher for a long time. Yeah. And I suppose the investigative part of it is really from that, because I was a qualitative social science researcher. So, that's the kind of researcher who does interviews and observations and focus groups and a lot of human contact. So again, it's trying to find out from individuals and groups of people what something means for them.
So take us back to this time when you're in this midst of college life. You can kind of choose what part of the college career you're in. But give us an example of you told us what your dream for St. James is. What were your dreams then? What did you want for yourself and for the world at the time as a college student, and doing all these research things? And question.
So when I was teaching in Korea, I remember thinking at that time that the thing that I didn't like about classroom teaching was it didn't have a big enough effect on the world. So then I thought to myself, and the logic in my mind at that time was, so I guess I need to get into policy work or research, some way to find out bigger meanings, thinking that bigger would be better,
Yeah.
So I went and got a doctorate from Harvard in education, looking at sort of classroom environments and different kinds of curricula and the effects that they had on students' learnings in cities, in whole school districts. I traveled around the United States, interviewing students and teachers in places like Jacksonville, Florida, and Chattanooga, Tennessee, and El Paso, and Philadelphia, and just had wonderful experiences in all different kinds of schools and school districts. Still searching for, in that case, what's working, what's not working. In those days, there were these wonderful new curricula coming out that were much more inquiry-based and hands-on and exploratory, all good things. But a lot of times they would just throw them at teachers and expect teachers to be able to teach that way when that's not how they had come up as students. And there was no really good, in those days, support for that kind of teaching and learning. So it was looking at that. And now I forgot your question.
Well, I don't think there was a question. I think we're just talking about what that. Oh, I was asking what were your values then? What were your, what is?
So I wanted schools. I wanted to see public schools where students could do work that was creative and personal, and sorry about the dogs, and where teachers could support each other and feel respected and
He's jealous. He wants to be on.
That's what I wanted. What?
He's jealous. He wants to be on the show with you.
I know. Yes, Jackson, come here. Come here. Now we've done it. They're all going to come over. Here's one.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah. So this is a new one. So anyway, that's what I wanted. But I also, back in those days, I thought that a good career was a career where you could have a certain amount of acknowledgement and prestige. And I think I remembered my stepfather, who, even though he wasn't a nice person, he was a really interesting professional, and he did a lot of interesting work in different parts of the world. And I sort of thought that's the kind of career I wanted to have. But I was always hungry for the real time with people. That's the part that I loved,
So what did those experiences in going from majoring in English to figuring out teaching to working with people to find out what their values were and yours, what did that experience teach you? What did you learn from it?
What I learned from it on a personal level is that for me, my best work is with other people. Yes, I spend 6 hours a week writing a sermon, but and yes, we're in a pandemic, so I don't see that many people these days. But I come alive in working with people and helping people understand their relationship with God better. So the ultimate meaning, right? So when it's around meaning making. That's what I'm here to do. Is to help facilitate that and help people. Everyone's on their journey to do that in some way or another, to just be helpful on people's journeys.
And speaking about your journey, there was something that happened with you where, because you weren't a Christian at this point.
When was I? I became a Christian when I was 23, living in Korea.
So yeah, I'm very curious about that, and I'm trying to get to when did your When did your
call.
value system? Yeah, I mean, when did your value system change, and what? I mean, because some people struggle with this idea even now about the God thing and the purpose thing, and so all these things we talked about are very concrete. This to this to this, and I can do this. But now God comes into it, and that's sort of for a lot of people this nebulous universal thing. Can you talk about that a little bit when that transformation happened?
So. The big evangelistic moments in my life have always been in other countries. So for me, becoming a Christian in Korea, because that is such a Christian country, and I was so awakened and inspired by that. It's incredible, yeah. And then some years later, working in South Africa, the same thing. I could just being in countries where there's just so much more of a, I won't say more, I'll say, but there's such an alive thing, across the board. And I've experienced that too, traveling in India and other places, and certainly living in Uganda. So that's maybe more than any place else for me. So, it was a gradual process. I mean, I grew up with no real exposure to church. And then I became a Christian in Korea, and then came back to the United States and had this professional life. But something was at work in me that I couldn't understand. And I remember there was this time I was having lunch on Block Island off the coast of Rhode Island with my then, we weren't married yet, but who would become my husband. And out of the blue, these words came out of my mouth. They didn't pass through my mind. They just came out. I said to him, I think you should know that someday I might be a minister. And he knew I didn't even go to church, so I'm sure he didn't think this was a really big threat, you know. But he said the nicest thing, which I never forgot. He said, well, a life's a long time. And it was long. It was just sort of year by year. I was feeling this sort of. It was a feeling of being called into something that I didn't have words for. I mean, those words that I said to him were years ahead of any other words that came out of my mouth about that. It was just there in me in this way. And then finally, after having amazing children and working in research, that I was spending a lot of time in beige offices writing beige reports and craving more time in the field, more time with interview subjects and just feeling like this life of research was not a fit with the gifts that I have. And so we moved to Uganda, and I was teaching in Uganda in a slum outside of Kampala, which I'd heard about through the church we were going to, which was a tent church. And my classroom was the back of a truck. It was a metal truck container. And that experience, the children, their enthusiasm, their brilliance, that whole experience, just my whole life changed. You know, the things that used to seem important in terms of achievements didn't feel important anymore. I just felt like I kind of came home to myself, you know, in that time. And I still didn't understand what was happening to me, but I knew that I was changing rapidly at that point.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is that thoughts most of the time and working on ourselves most of the time is not what changes us, but it's the experiences that change us.
Then it all comes together. I think it all comes. I mean, I knew before we went to Uganda that something was happening, and I remember going to my priest and saying to her, "Something is happening to me," and she prayed with me. It's so beautifully, you know, to just be open to whatever it was, you know. And then when I got back from Uganda, I went straight to my priest and told her. I tried to tell her. I don't know what I was trying to say, but I don't think I was still even daring to really think that I could be a priest, but almost. Yeah.
Why a priest and not some other?
Yeah, why not a social worker? Why not a...
Or why not even a evangelical pastor? Or why not why a priest?
I mean, I was hanging out with a lot of evangelicals in Korea and also in Uganda. And I've said this to you before, I love the passion and the relationship with Jesus, and I love it. And so I think a lot of I like to believe that my experiences with those people really inspired my journey in important ways. But of course, I could never get behind the political and social beliefs. They were just anathema to me. So I think that's why I couldn't be an evangelical minister. And the Episcopal Church just, it's perfect.
Yeah. Wait, do you remember the time or the moment when was there a moment when you said, this is what I'm going to do? Like, this is it. I'm going to become a priest.
So back to my priest's office, I feel like I went straight from the airport from Uganda to her office. I probably dropped bags off at home first, burst into her office. And I think I somehow communicated to her what I was dreaming of, but then I just burst into tears and I said, but I'm so old, and I mean, I was in my 40s then, I wasn't old, but I felt like, and also I'd already been to university so many times, it was getting ridiculous, how many, and I knew that I'd have to go back for another master's degree. And so anyway, I was a wreck. And she said the best thing. She said, Jesus just had 3 years, so don't worry about time, And it was the most freeing thing. It just put it in perspective that that it's God's time that we're talking about and not any other kind of time. And so she said, well, who have you worked with? And I said, I've worked with children. That's really what I knew. She said, have you ever worked with the elderly? And I said, nope. So she immediately sent me to work as a trainee chaplain at the local hospital, and she had me delivering Meals on Wheels. And I went back to her a few months later, and I said, I love it. And so she would give me these little tests, and every step along the way, I felt this sense that doors were just flying open, and that it felt so right, and I just felt overwhelming joy in that process of discovery, even though, it's stressful going through the formation process. And it was stressful going back to college again in my 40s. And I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to memorize,
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've definitely I've worked with priests a lot, and a lot of them are second career priests. I mean, second half of life. I think it's a very common thing, especially in the Episcopal Church.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to be able to have had a life, to draw on.
Right. I think that's so important to me. I mean, I tend to have a heavy dose of agnosticism in my life. And I kind of celebrate that mystery that we've talked about with Jose, the mystery of it. And I really like wrestling with the authenticity of that. And I think that having real life experience in other fields can really help in that regard too. So it's an interesting.
I mean, that being said, I'm also totally jealous of people who found this in the beginning of their lives.
Sure. Yeah.
I love it so much. I think, but I don't think I was ready. And so again, God's time.
And this is all about I've been thinking a lot too about what your life work is. We all have what our life work is, and it's the work that we're doing that's connected to each. I like to connect the dots. So from what you're doing right now, if you connect a dot to what happened, what had to happen for this to happen, and if you keep tracing that back, you'll find this thread of what your life work is.
Yes.
And what I'm hearing from you is that your work with people on this planet is what your life work is, and transforming, and what you can bring, and what you can, the most importantly, what you can show others what they can bring to the world.
That's right.
Right. And then taking those gifts that they have now been revealed to them, and how do they put those in action? I think that's what's been shown to me is a great gift to us at St. James.
You know what? I have friends who are therapists. I have friends who are Reiki masters. I have friends who are yoga teachers. And I think that something that my work has in common with them is I think of us as all energy workers in a way.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of on a nonverbal level, what I'm helping to do is to move energy around.
I love that.
To open channels of energy and faith energy, right? This is beautiful faith energy, and to connect energies and uncover and there's times when I'm leading worship when this is weird. I've never said this before, but I almost feel like invisibly I can see the energy moving around the room, you know? And it's so beautiful to me, you know. It's so beautiful to me, especially at St. James. Oh my goodness. And sort of I can sort of nudge them this way or that way, especially at funerals where there's a lot of sort of distressed energy, but also so much love, and it's a very specific task then, you know. On any given Sunday, you never know exactly what's going to be going on. So it's sort of like an energy worker, although I don't know if that sounds kooky or not. But
that sounds great, and I think all of us can kind of identify with that. And the energy that's in that, I mean, we all love St. James. We all love the space. The space itself is an energy vortex, I'm convinced.
For sure. Oh,
yeah. And you know that I often go back to the history of the place, and I love making those connections of who was there before and the energies of that place that were created. But now we're finding ourselves in the space where the energy has been spread out, and we have to find a way to come together to make all of that energy work together for this good that we're doing together in the same direction.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think it's a great analogy.
Yeah, you could. So the energy analogy is one, and then the story analogy is another way. You know, if you want to put it in words,
right.
Then it's sort of pulling all the threads of the story together.
And sometimes when you can't use words, that's sort of where I struggle with sometimes is the words part, which is interesting because I do words for a living. But then there comes the non-words, which are musical tones.
Yes.
And
oh my.
Stuart says, I think Kate hit the nail on the head, as previous clergy have often noted that St. James' greatest strength is its diversity, and greatest disappointment that the diverse groups remain siloed.
We do, that is so everything that's going on in the silos is fabulous, and I want movement between.
And I think that's happening. Interestingly enough, during this pandemic.
Yeah.
When we're not together, but we're alone together, and we're all finding this way to really intimately connect to one another.
I think we have to, and we're realizing more than ever before that we desperately need each other in order to be whole and well and who we are at St. James.
Arnold is here.
Arnold! I loved interviewing you, Arnold.
That was a great interview with Arnold. Mother Kate, how do you manage the many personalities at St. James? Speaking of that.
Well, I love the many personalities at St. James. I love them. And I love, I mean, I'll say it can be a challenge sometimes because, well, I mean, sometimes there are competing interests and maybe there are people who need to, what I see that we are just a community that needs to understand each other better, and the better and better we understand each other, the more as a community we are just poised for liftoff. It's anything is possible. So sometimes when personalities are, did he say different or difficult?
No, he just said the many different personalities. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So yeah. So I always know that for me, if a personality is challenging to me, I just need to know more of the story. I just don't know enough of the story yet.
Yeah, and that's a good challenge for all of us, I think.
Mm-hmm.
For each other too. Let's see.
But I love all the personalities.
Nancy Redford is here.
Nancy, I miss you, Nancy.
She says, besides the Bible and God, is there a writer who particularly inspires you when you compose your sermons?
When I compose my sermons, well, I'm on a real Thomas Merton high right now because I attended a day-long Zoom retreat on Thomas Merton last Saturday. He was a monk who lived for many years in Kentucky at the Abbey at Gethsemane, and I would say that his work was one of the sort of cornerstones of my call. That idea of his that all of us are shining like the sun, but we just don't see it. I mean, I think that's his idea that there's this sort of veil between our world now and God's kingdom, and it's just a matter of sort of seeing what we don't often enough see. And so then my job is to help people see it more, So, and then the other, I guess these are more sort of influences on me. Was Anthony DeMello, another Catholic priest, actually, who was in India. And one of my sisters told me about his work, and that was really hugely important to me. But I'm always reading lots of different things. I don't think I have one go-to these days, but I'm always trolling. We're always trolling for stories, and I'm always trolling for perspectives.
Yeah, I was going to ask you earlier, like, what are you reading? Are you a big reader? But that seems like you are.
Yeah, that's all I do, right?
Yeah.
But I won't be able to remember what I'm reading because it's all in my Kindle.
It's so interesting. I mean, I'm reading other perspectives and spiritual ideas too. I mean, I'm reading something from Thich Nhat Hanh right now, and another thing from Eckhart.
That was another big. That's sort of no fear, no death. That was a turning point for me. Big turning point, that book.
Great. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Greg Dern. When the call to ministry arrived, did you A, answer the first ring, B, after several rings, or C, listen to the message from voicemail? It's an interesting question.
I think my answer before was sort of what it is, that the call started coming decades before I even understood the language in which I was hearing it. So it was a very long, slow process. But then the final call, it was the breakthrough, the one in Uganda. Yeah.
Do you think that's true for all of us in our various walks of life? That there's something that is churning and then leads to another, and if we're not, it's a whisper first, and then it gets louder and louder and louder until we come to that.
I don't know if that's true for everybody, Justin. I think that maybe some people are always attuned, and they're just picking it all up from the beginning. I think it took me a long time to learn how to to feel awake and alive in the way that I do now. So it was very gradual for me, but I do think some people come right out of the gate with more awareness.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true too. Mm-hmm. Lucy Wegner from choir is here.
Lucy.
What surprised you most when you came to St. James?
That's right.
And we haven't really talked about your story about coming to St. James, really. But
the thing that the happy surprise for me at St. James was the warmth of the welcome. But I want to say one thing that meant so much to me, and that was Mother Jennifer Chatfield.
Yeah.
You know, for the first 3 months, she stood by my side. She took care of admin. She just let me fall in love with everybody, which was so easy, and learn the feel of the place and find myself comfortable. If I'd been worrying about rotas and bills and all those things in those first 2 weeks, I think I would have been distracted. But she gave me the gift of space to focus on the people, and it was heaven. It was heaven. It was the most painless, beautiful transition, and it was all because of her incredible foresight and also generosity of spirit.
Yeah, that's great. She was so great for St. James.
She was, and she's great now where she's serving in Pasadena. She's an amazing woman. But are you going to ask me how I found my way to St. James?
Yeah, so just tell us that story.
There are 2 or 3 people who haven't heard this so far. I always think it's so funny. So I was serving in Massachusetts. My daughter moved to LA, and she started dating this nice boy who, it turns out, was a singer in the St. James choir. And she went to church to hear him sing one Sunday. And she was texting me. She was sitting in the front row. She didn't want to miss any of the music. She was texting me, "Mom, you're not going to believe this church. There's people here from Africa. There's people here from Korea, and the music." And so, I mean, she was amazed. And also she knew that everything I love was in this church,
Right.
And so I have Michael to thank for that. Michael, thank you for, if you ever hear this, and thank you for helping to introduce me to St. James, because I don't think I would have thought about it, about I don't know. I didn't know that St. James existed.
Talk about connecting the dots.
Yes, but once I found out that a place like St. James existed, I mean, I was determined to find my way here.
Can you talk about, I think we've all had our sort of first St. James experience. Can you tell me about yours?
A first experience.
Which is going to be different for you, I think, as a...
What do you mean by that? What are you thinking about?
Well, your journey is talking about applying for it and going to this place. But when did you have the moment where you were in the place?
I've already told this story when I was interviewing Jim Bonamani. It was listening to him play the organ and standing behind the altar and looking out into the empty church and hearing that sound. And I touched the altar and feeling like it was warm. It was that moment.
Speaking of,
it was that moment.
Energy.
Because I kept thinking when I first, the energy was. But when I first walked into the church, I thought, this is a pretty formal place. I don't know if this is me, But then the warmth is also even in the space. Not to mention when I met all the amazing people, right?
Sure.
Yeah. I think maybe my first potluck. Maybe there were just these experiences.
Lots of firsts.
Lots. Oh yeah. I mean, the whole first year. The first lessons of carols. The first Christmas Eve.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had no idea that church could be so momentously grand and yet intimate at the same time. It's carrying that baby, the baby Jesus, and Christmas Eve, as a mother, as a woman carrying this, and being in this massive procession and the choir and the smoke, and my mind was happily blown.
I think we've all had very similar experiences in our own regards, and you have a very specific to St. James. You have a very strong connection to the music.
Yes.
I know that was one of the factors that you just really loved and still do.
Oh, yeah.
Going on a tour with us to Ireland was evident of that too. Is it that way? Do you have a strong connection to music in general?
Music is so important. It's one of the things that was sort of missing from my life before. And when I came here, it was such a dream come true, because I had never imagined that I would get to be in the midst of music on the of this caliber. I mean, it's who gets this? Nobody does, Yeah. I mean, I feel every Sunday like I've won the lottery, and to just be in this place where I have the privilege of supporting in any way that I can this musical program. I'm just really, I'm proud. I'm proud and humbled by I'm not kidding, by this privilege. It's heaven. And Jim Bonamani is heaven. And the choir, all of you in the choir are heaven.
No, it's an unparalleled experience.
I listen to the YouTube channel of St. James Choir all the time, just so that I can relive these moments, these most transcendent moments of music. I mean, music to the glory of God, in this place. And I'm always saying to you, I can't believe you got to sing this, What was it like? I asked, what was it? How do you experience being inside that music? I mean, I have the thrill, Father John and I have the thrill of being, in these catbird seats, but still to be able to create it. Wow.
Yeah, I've been in both situations, and they're both very different, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, making it and then being able to listen to it is also a gift too, because you're so, focused on the moment. But, speaking of when we were talking about words and not words and music and authors and writers, and even sometimes we use a singing bowl to respond in ways. And I think that's a very interesting thing to think about. I have one in my house that was a gift to me. But it's sometimes when you don't have words to say or to speak or to formulate or read on this brain level, but you have some sort of universal spiritual response that you need, or to come back to yourself. In the frame that you're viewing the world, sometimes even a musical tone like a bell can kind of reset that for you in these moments that we have. And for me personally, that's one of the most amazing parts of the service. And as a singer, I think it's because at that moment I don't have to do anything. So I don't have to read something or be focused on something or follow something, but I'm just responding in this something that's simple as a tone that everyone can kind of hear at the same time. And you can't argue with the tone. It's just what it is. And it means something to different people.
To be part of a worship experience with music that's so transcendently good. It just means that we're awakened on so many on such in such a fuller way,
Awaken's a good thing too. Yeah.
Yeah.
You you mentioned in writing something that you wrote once that church is a school for love.
Oh, yes. I did write that. That's completely what I believe.
And I loved that sentence. Can you give me an example of, or just talk about that just for a second? And then we're kind of wrapping up at our time, but I just kind of wanted you to talk about what you mean by that.
Right. Okay. So we're all complicated people. We've all had amazing experiences in our lives and also traumas in our lives, and that sort of those dots that have led us, as you said, to where we are right now. And we bring all of that into church and into community with all these other people that bring all their experiences and hurts and gifts and all of that. And like Arnold was talking about, all those different personalities. And to me, the most beautiful thing in the world is that we do come together. And what we're really doing when we come together, we're doing two things. We're glorifying God. We're praising God, thanking God. And we're also learning how to live the kind of love that He taught us about. So this is where we come to practice. This is our school for loving, for we practice loving each other. People get into all kinds of, conflicts in every church. And then, you hear these people say, I can't believe that there was an argument like that in that church. Of course in a church. Exactly in a church. This is a group of people. And this is, we bring all of this stuff and we bump up against each other. So the ways in which we can learn to love each other across difference, across difficulty, across conflicts, across heartbreaks, is the sort of our splendid work, and so yeah. There's also people who talk about what Martin Luther said, church is the hospital for sinners, and that's another way of thinking about it. But I like the school image much better because we are learning all the time how to love each other better. And that's our job. That's why we're here. So not just why we're here at St. James, but I believe why we're here on the planet. We're learning how to love.
Well, I was going to ask you as a final question, what is your dream? And you've said this before, and you always ask this, what is your dream for St. James? But I was going to extend it to what is your dream for St. James, but what is your dream for the world too?
It's so hard right now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But that's what dreams are for.
Yeah, exactly. I guess my dream for now is that we can use this time as fully as possible as an opportunity to come to know ourselves better, raise our consciousness as humans, open our hearts more, deepen our relationship with God, and get a stronger sense of our mission in the world. And I feel like if we can use this time out of time in that way, then maybe there's a hope for some really important and powerful reversals in the years to come. I'm not talking about, that sounds political. I mean it much more broadly than that. Yeah, because we're always trying to live in a way that's more like the kingdom of God.
Great. Well, Kate, thank you so much. We've been here for over an hour.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry, everyone. You need to do your dinner now.
This was totally my fault. And I'm sorry that I didn't get to everybody's questions, but this was so interesting. And thank you so much for doing this and being a guest on your own show.
I know. I can't wait to actually. Oh, guys, by the way, next Friday, I'm taking Friday off. I'm going to see my sister, and you know that means a lot to me.
Yeah, right.
Yes. But I'll be back after that, and we'll keep on with conversations with Kate. And Justin, thank you for making me do this. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing it. I think it was so fun, and it's great getting to know you more and more as you have as your rector here at St. James.
A really good rule of thumb for me in my work is to just do what Justin tells me to do. So I do.
Oh, please. No, don't do that. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Good
Kate,
night.
thanks for being here. Everyone have a great night, and we'll see you on Sunday on the stream. Bye.